Hello, I'm Tim Heath, and in this video, I'm going to be reading Chapter 2 from Twiggy Rattlesnake and the School of Time and Space. If you haven't seen Chapter 1, look at that video first. I've read the whole of Chapter 1, and then come back to this one. So Chapter 2 is called The Corridors of Time. Twiggy slept very little that night. He was too excited. Getting out of bed just after 7, he was sure that his grandfather would have a right laugh about it all before too long. The man was a huge joker and prided himself on constantly pulling Twiggy's leg about almost anything. This time he'd gone too far. The ground floor was still empty of grandparents as Twiggy descended the stairs, his gifts on the kitchen table, just as the mysterious package was in the middle of the lounge floor, where he'd left it after coming back inside last night. He went straight to the lounge, picking up the letter once more, reading word for word everything it said. He laughed to himself. It was ridiculous. Had to be a joke. Had to be. He picked up the time changer, or whatever it really was, inspecting it like it was a bomb, looking for any sign that would give away its actual identity. On the bottom half of the orb, and something he'd not noticed when he'd first held it in the early hours last night, was a date. It was his birthday, 1 year ago. There were some dials next to it, which he dared not touch. On the top of the orb was another button, more enticing, more obvious. The instructions said that this made the object work. He grabbed the white armband, trying it on. It looked a little strange with the pyjamas he was wearing, but no one was around, so he kept it on regardless. He'd been sitting there for 10 minutes. The television turned on when both of his grandparents came downstairs, wishing him a happy birthday as soon as they spotted him. He hugged them, squeezing hard. His grandfather eyed the box beside Twiggy's feet knowingly. "You've really done it with this one, Gramps," Twiggy laughed. His grandfather just smiled. "Not me this time, boy. You must ask your grandmother to show you how it works." "Don't give me that. It's obviously a joke. It says it's a time changer. But that's impossible." "I think it's time you showed him, love, don't you?" His grandfather was serious, looking over to his grandmother, who had the kettle in her hand. "I've not even put the kettle on yet." She did nothing, without first drinking a cup of tea in the morning. 5 minutes later, she put her cup down. She'd not had time to finish it all, but Twiggy was fidgeting awkwardly on the sofa, itching to prove it was all some hoax. "I'll explain how it works. You can try it alone." "Alone? You don't want your old grandmother slowing you down now, do you?" They'd had the same conversation 30 years ago with their daughter, though it had been the opposite then. She'd insisted on trying it alone, despite their protests. "I don't know what I want. I mean, you're serious? This isn't all some bizarre trick of Gramps?" "Not this time, Twiggy, unfortunately. It's in our blood, you see." "What is?" "We have the gift. You evidently do too. Otherwise, they wouldn't have enrolled you." "What gift? I don't understand." "Come, let me show you how this works." She took the orb from his hand, checking the date on the bottom. It always arrived pre-programmed, not easily tampered with. She handed it back to him. "You'll have to be the one to press it. It's your journey we are locked into, but I can join you if you want me to. We just have to hold hands." Twiggy grabbed her hand almost before she'd finished speaking, taking the orb back from her once she offered it to him. "Now follow the instructions." Twiggy reached for the other sheet of paper that came with the letter. He put the orb into his left hand, turning his body so that he could hold his grandmother's hand in his right. He crossed his legs, straightened his back, positioned the orb perfectly in his hand as shown, with the bottom at the top, with the button at the top under his thumb, and the date pressed into the palm of his left hand, exactly how the sheet of paper was instructing him to do it. He felt a bit silly, and though both of his grandparents still kept their straight face, his grandfather was just starting to look a little excited. "Ready?" his grandmother asked, looking into his blue eyes. He felt anything but ready. I think so. He put his head up, eyes to the ceiling, which was the last instruction on the list. Then press it. Twiggy's grip tightened on his grandmother's hand. His left thumb depressed the button on top of the time changer. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Twiggy was about to say something when a corridor appeared. His grandmother took a step forward, taking them through what looked like a misty veil separating the lounge from the corridor that stretched out in front of them. "Don't let go of my hand now, Twiggy," his grandmother warned. He wanted to ask why, but then everything around him was taking his complete attention. He was no longer standing in his grandparents' lounge. It was as if it had transported him, without moving more than a couple of steps, into a different building. There were doors along either side of the corridor. Turning around, behind them and back out the misty veil was the lounge, both himself and his grandmother standing there as if frozen, the orb still in his hand, his gramps watching from one side, no one moving. It was a world of colour and light, though it felt detached from where they now were, even though it was barely half a metre in front of them. "This is amazing, Grandma," Twiggy exclaimed. He reached out his hand as if to touch the space between where they were and what they were looking at in front of them. "Don't," she warned. He put his hand back down. "We'll be back there soon enough," and she turned him around, still clasping his hand so that they were facing back down the corridor, the way they'd first been standing. "Where do all these doors go?" Twiggy asked. She smiled. Most children first asked the most common question of them all. Where are we? But he'd never been most children, and she'd always noticed with wonder. She'd also never heard of anyone whose corridor had as many doors as she could see in front of them. "You learn all about that at school during your second year, if I remember correctly." She started leading him down the corridor. "For now, we just have to walk to the end," and they set out. There was no obvious end in sight, the corridor just seeming to go on, then turn. She'd never seen such a corridor before. The proper name for them was the corridors of time. Most were much shorter. After they turned the corner, an open door was suddenly visible. Through it, a similar image of light and activity was before them, like a living waterfall. It was a room crowded with people, his school friends from the year before, his birthday cake on the table, his 12-year-old self standing there, waiting to blow out the candles. Just like at the other end of the corridor, this scene too stood frozen in time, everyone still, like characters in a film with the movie on pause. They walked right up to the doorway so that Twiggy was barely centimetres from it. "This one you can enter," his grandmother encouraged, and together they stepped out into the lounge. Though it wasn't the lounge they'd just left with his gramps standing next to them, this was a party, his 12th birthday party from the year before. After a few seconds, the room sprang into life, causing Twiggy to jump with fright. A car alarm sounded outside as the candles on the cake were blown out by a draft from somewhere. He watched his grandmother relight the candles as the two of them circled the scene. "I remember this," he said, barely whispering. "It's okay. They can't see or hear us." "I remember the candles blowing out. It was us, wasn't it?" She noted with pride how Twiggy had taken this all in his stride. "I guess it was," though she had always had her suspicions since the previous year. The car alarm, the sudden draft as the candles went out for no obvious reason. She'd been counting down their last year of normality with a boy they both loved dearly. Right around that small room, the party continued. 12-year-old Twiggy blew the candles out properly now, everyone singing happily away, though he saw his grandmother's expression this time, something he'd not noticed a year before. She'd known this day was coming, even then. Why hadn't she ever said anything? But then again, would he have ever believed her? "I think we've seen enough now, don't you?" His grandmother was gently pulling him back to the corridor opening, which had remained open the entire time, something of a bizarre scene from where 13-year-old Twiggy was now viewing things. He couldn't help thinking he had far from seen enough. This was all too brilliant to miss. But we've only just arrived. This was merely to show you something. The genuine wonders will come soon. Twiggy remembered the invitation. He was going to the School of Time and Space. So it really was all true. Hope you've enjoyed chapter 2. Do check out the book. It's available on Amazon. Links will be in the description. And comment if you've enjoyed it. If you want more, let me know, and maybe I'll do some more videos. But come say hi, and let's make Twiggy famous so that everyone has a chance to discover this amazing adventure that's begun this month. Okay, bye.